Deep beneath the waves of Midgard's endless oceans, something ancient stirs. A creature so vast that its body encircles the entire world, holding its own tail in its mouth. Tonight, you'll discover the first time Thor, god of thunder, came face to face with Jormungandr, the World Serpent. How a simple fishing trip turned into an epic battle that shook the very foundations of the earth and sea. A confrontation that would echo through prophecy until the end of days. Close your eyes and journey with us to the shores of Midgard, where gods walk among giants, and the ocean holds secrets older than memory itself. The morning mist clung to the rocky shores of Midgard like ghostly fingers, reluctant to release their grip on ancient stones. Thor Odinson stood at the edge of creation itself, where land met the endless expanse of ocean. His red hair, bright as forge fires, caught the first rays of dawn, and Mjolnir rested comfortably at his side, its weight both familiar and reassuring. The air was crisp with salt tang, carrying whispered promises of adventure that stirred the hearts of the Aesir. Gulls wheeled overhead in graceful arcs, their cries echoing off weathered cliffs. The waves lapped against shore with a rhythm old as time itself, marking the eternal dance between sea and stone. It had been but a season since Thor had gained his legendary weapon from the dwarven smiths, yet already the hammer had proven itself in countless adventures. The weapon hummed with barely contained power, eager for action. But today, Thor sought not the familiar thrill of battle against frost giants. Today, he sought something different, testing his strength against the mysteries dwelling in the ocean's crushing depths. For weeks, the Thunder God had listened with growing fascination to stories reaching even Asgard's golden halls. Tales brought by ravens and visiting gods, by wandering skalds and seafaring mortals, all speaking of creatures beneath the waves that defied understanding. Mortal fishermen spoke in hushed tones of shadows beneath the waves that moved with intelligence, of fishing nets torn by creatures whose size could only be guessed from their destruction. Entire schools of fish would flee from disturbances that sent tremors through the ocean floor, creating underwater earthquakes felt as mysterious rumblings in the night. Even Odin's ravens had brought word from their flights over the world's waters. They spoke of areas where the sea changed color without cause, shifting from familiar blue-green to deep purples and blacks, suggesting unfathomable depths. Whirlpools appeared and vanished without explanation, and the very air above certain ocean stretches carried tastes of ancient secrets. Thor's divine pride had been kindled by these tales until it blazed like forge fire in his chest. If mortal men could dare challenge the deep's mysteries, surely Odin's son could do infinitely better. What glory would there be in defeating another frost giant when such victories had become routine? But to battle a creature of the deep, something even brave fishermen spoke of with reverence and fear. That would be a triumph worthy of eternal song in Asgard's halls. But Thor was not alone on this mist-shrouded morning. Beside him stood Hymir the giant, whose very presence spoke of ages beyond counting. Ancient beyond mortal reckoning, he towered over Thor's impressive frame, a remnant of the old world from when the boundaries between realms were fluid and reality's laws were still being written. His skin bore the texture of weathered granite, each scar a testament to battles fought when the world was young. Some marks spoke of conflicts with primordial forces, others of encounters with frost giants and fire demons. His massive hands could crush boulders or handle delicate work with surprising gentleness, and his gray beard stirred with dignity that commanded respect even from gods. Hymir's eyes, deep as mountain caves, held accumulated wisdom of one who had seen empires rise and fall like morning mist. He had sailed these waters since before the youngest Aesir had been born, learning their moods through countless generations of patient observation. The giant was not like the frost giants Thor regularly battled. Those beings were creatures of malice, seeking to return the world to primordial chaos. But Hymir belonged to an older order, a creature of earth and sea, bound to the world by ties deeper than political allegiance. His knowledge of the ocean's depths was unparalleled, earned through centuries of respectful coexistence with forces even gods approached carefully. His relationship with the Aesir had been forged in creation's early days, when gods needed the older beings' knowledge to establish their dominion. These ancient pacts were sealed with honor and mutual respect rather than fear and submission. When Thor had arrived at Hymir's hall, seeking a fishing companion with the knowledge and equipment for deep-water expeditions, the giant had received him with courtesy, due an equal. Yet something in Hymir's ancient eyes suggested he knew more about what such an expedition might bring than he revealed. "I have seen the deep waters work their will upon both gods and mortals," Hymir had warned during their preparations. "The ocean keeps its own counsel and follows laws older than those governing Asgard. What dwells in the deepest places was ancient when the world was young, and it remembers things that even the wisest Aesir have forgotten." But Thor, caught up in anticipation of the hunt, had dismissed such warnings as overly cautious musings of advanced age. What could threaten the son of Odin, wielder of Mjolnir? "Young Thunderer," Hymir rumbled, his voice like stones grinding in an avalanche. "Are you certain you wish to venture into the deep waters today? The ocean holds secrets that even we giants treat with caution." Thor hefted Mjolnir with easy confidence, the hammer's perfect balance making it feel weightless in his divine hands. What could possibly threaten the son of Odin? I have fought frost giants and fire demons, tamed storms and commanded lightning. Surely the fish of Midgard pose no challenge worthy of concern. Hymir's ancient features creased into what might have been a smile, though it held little warmth. "Pride, young god. It has been the downfall of many mighty beings. But come, if you are determined, let us see what the depths will offer us today." The giant's fishing boat was a marvel of ancient craftsmanship, built from the bones of some primordial sea creature and bound with leather treated with forgotten substances. The vessel was carved with protective runes and binding spells, ancient wards against deep creatures and charms ensuring safe passage through waters where reality sometimes grew thin. Large enough for both god and giant, yet light enough that Hymir could launch it with a single push that sent spray flying like scattered diamonds. Thor examined his fishing equipment with the attention he reserved for weapons before battle. His line was woven from the strongest materials in Asgard, silver threads spun by light elves and twisted with dragon sinew. Strong enough to restrain a giant, inscribed with runes, preventing any creature from biting through it. His hook was forged from star metal by the same dwarven smiths who created Mjolnir. Brock and Atri had shaped it with their own hands, infusing it with properties making it irresistible to sea creatures. The hook gleamed with internal light, and Thor could feel its contained power. For bait, Thor had chosen the head of Hymir's prized bull, Hymir. This had been no ordinary beast, but a creature of immense size and intelligence, possessing strength to move mountains and wisdom to speak in tongues of gods and men. Its meat was tender as honey and nourishing as ambrosia, capable of feeding a giant's family through harsh winters. "That bull fed my family for 3 generations," Hymir grumbled as Thor secured the massive ox head with star metal chains. Hymir was born in the first spring after creation, growing mighty on primordial meadows. Using his head as bait seems wasteful, borderline sacrilegious. "Fear not, friend Hymir," Thor replied with divine confidence. "When I pull the greatest fish from these depths, you'll see Hymir's sacrifice was not only worthwhile but necessary. Such magnificent bait will attract a creature worthy of our efforts, making this expedition a tale for gods and giants alike." As they rowed out with powerful strokes, morning mist lifted in spirals, revealing the ocean's true vastness surrounding Midgard like an endless blue-green embrace. Near the coast, water was clear as crystal, allowing them to see down through liquid light to sandy bottoms where crabs scuttled among kelp forests, swaying like underwater gardens. But as they moved from land's safety, water grew darker and more mysterious, taking on the deep blue-black of midnight skies pierced by distant stars. The transformation was gradual but inexorable. Comfortable coastal blue deepening through sapphire shades until it became impenetrable darkness that swallowed light itself. They rode for what felt like hours through waters that seemed to exist outside the normal flow of time, their rhythmic strokes carrying them steadily away from the familiar world of land and safety into realms that belonged more to myth than reality. The coastline of Midgard dwindled gradually from a reassuring presence to a thin brown line on the horizon, then to a barely visible smudge, and finally vanished entirely into the morning haze, leaving them alone on an ocean that stretched to the very edges of existence. Hymir seemed to know these waters with an intimacy that spoke of countless years spent studying their moods and mysteries. He guided their boat with subtle adjustments to their course, reading signs in the water surface that were completely invisible to Thor's untrained eye. A slight change in the wave pattern here, a different quality to the water's color there, the behavior of distant seabirds, the direction of the wind itself. All these things spoke to the giant in a language as clear and comprehensible as spoken words. "Here," Hymir announced finally, his massive oar cutting through the water one last time before he shipped it and allowed their momentum to carry them to a gentle stop. "These are the old fishing grounds, where my people have come for generations beyond easy counting. The water runs deep here, deeper than even we giants truly comprehend. And the currents from the world's edge bring strange things up from the abyssal plains where light has never touched and pressure would crush mountains to powder." The giant's own fishing was a masterclass in patience and methodology that stood in stark contrast to Thor's more impulsive, action-oriented nature. Hymir worked multiple lines with practiced efficiency, his massive hands handling the delicate tackle with a precision that would have impressed the finest craftsmen of Asgard. Each movement was economical and purposeful, the result of technique refined over centuries of practice and handed down through generations of his people. Throughout the long morning, as the sun climbed higher in a sky that had become a perfect dome of crystalline blue, unmarked by even a single cloud, Hymir pulled fish from the depths with steady, almost mechanical regularity. His catches were impressive even by the generous standards of giant kind, creatures that would have been the stuff of legend among mortal fishermen. Each fish he brought aboard was a marvel of adaptation to the crushing environment of the deep ocean, with scales that gleamed like polished metal, eyes specially adapted to function in the eternal darkness of the abyss, and teeth designed for a predatory lifestyle that knew no mercy or quarter. Some possessed bioluminescent organs that continued to pulse with eerie, otherworldly light even after death, creating patterns of blue and green fire that danced across their flanks like living constellations mapping unknown territories of the deep. Others bore appendages and sensory organs unlike anything found in the sunlit waters near shore, evolutionary marvels shaped by the crushing pressures and alien conditions that ruled the ocean's deepest reaches. "These are the children of the abyss," Hymir explained, as he examined one particularly bizarre specimen, a creature whose body seemed to shift and flow like liquid shadow even in death. "They have never known the touch of sunlight, never felt the warmth of shallow water, or the gentle caress of surface currents. They are born in crushing darkness and live their entire lives in a world of pressure and cold that would kill any surface-dwelling creature instantly. Yet they are magnificent in their own way, perfectly adapted to their harsh realm and possessing a terrible beauty that speaks of evolution's endless creativity." Thor, however, found himself growing increasingly frustrated with the methodical pace of traditional fishing. His divine nature, accustomed to the immediate gratification that came with battle and conquest, warred constantly with the patient, almost meditative requirements of angling. His powerful hands, trained to wield weapons of war and command the very lightning itself, seemed clumsy and inappropriate for the delicate work of feeling for subtle tugs and responding to the gentle takes of cautious fish. When fish did approach his bait, drawn by the rich aroma of Hymir magnificent head, Thor's excitement often caused him to jerk the line too quickly or set the hook with too much force, sending potential catches fleeing back into the safety of the depths before he could properly engage them in combat. The few fish that he did manage to hook proved disappointingly small by his divine standards, creatures that might feed a mortal family for weeks but hardly seemed worthy of a god's attention or effort. "Patience, Thunderer," Hymir advised, not unkindly, as he watched Thor throw back yet another fish that had failed to meet his lofty expectations. "The ocean keeps its own time, follows its own rhythms that have remained unchanged since the world's birth, and will continue long after its ending. You cannot command it as you do the lightning, cannot force it to yield its greatest treasures through strength alone. The most magnificent catches come to those who learn to work with the sea's ancient nature rather than against its eternal flow." But Thor was barely listening to the giant's hard-earned wisdom. His attention had become increasingly focused on the water around their boat, and his divine senses, far more acute than those of mortal men, were beginning to detect something that filled his warrior's heart with anticipation rather than the patience that Hymir counseled. Far below them, in depth so profound that they might have reached down to the very roots of Yggdrasil itself, something vast and powerful was stirring. The water pressure around their boat was changing in ways so subtle that only a god would notice them. Tiny variations that spoke of enormous displacement taking place in the abyss far below their fragile vessel. The patterns in which schools of small fish moved were shifting from their normal formations, becoming more agitated and erratic, as if they were fleeing from some presence that their primitive instincts recognized as the ultimate predator. something so dangerous that even their limited intelligence understood the need for immediate flight. Even the temperature of the water seemed to be fluctuating slightly, as though currents from unimaginable depths were beginning to rise toward the surface, carrying with them the crushing cold and alien essence of places where no god had ever ventured. Thor's divine nature, naturally attuned to the fundamental forces that governed existence throughout the 9 realms, could sense these changes with increasing clarity, and they spoke to him of power on a scale that made all his previous adventures seem like children's games. "There," Thor whispered, his voice tight with barely contained excitement as he gripped his fishing line with hands that had begun to tremble with anticipation rather than fear. "Do you feel that, Hymir? Something enormous moves in the depths below us, something that makes the very ocean itself take notice and respond. The water speaks of a presence so vast that its mere movement reshapes the currents themselves." The giant's expression grew troubled, ancient lines deepening across his weathered features as his own supernatural senses confirmed what Thor had detected. He glanced around at the water surrounding them with a new wariness that spoke of genuine concern, his eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting to see signs of approaching doom written in the waves themselves. "Perhaps we should return to shallower waters, young god," Hymir said, his voice carrying undertones of genuine concern that spoke of knowledge earned through bitter experience and close encounters with forces that even giants preferred to avoid. "There are some things in the deep places that are better left undisturbed, being so ancient and powerful that even the gods would be wise to avoid their attention. The ocean has its own hierarchy of power, and we surface dwellers, god and giant alike, are not always at the top of it." But Thor was already lowering his line, the star metal hook carrying the ox head down into darkness. The line played out, fathom after fathom, until even Thor began to wonder how deep these waters truly were. The weight of the ox head pulled the line taut, and Thor could feel it sinking through layers of water pressure that would crush any mortal vessel. Minutes passed like hours. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last morning mist and revealing the true isolation of their position. They were surrounded by water in all directions, the ocean stretching to the horizon like a blue-green desert. The only sounds were gentle lapping of waves against their boat and the occasional cry of a seabird high overhead. Then, without warning, the line went taut. The force that seized Thor's line was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was not the gentle tug of a fish taking bait, nor even the strong pull of a large catch fighting for freedom. This was something else entirely, a force so enormous that it nearly pulled Thor from the boat before he could brace himself. The thunder god's eyes widened in surprise and delight. His divine muscles, strengthened by battles against giants and trolls, strained against whatever had taken his bait. The line, woven from materials strong enough to bind gods, creaked under tension that would have snapped ordinary rope like spider silk. "By my father's beard," Thor laughed, his voice filled with the joy of a true challenge. "This is a catch worthy of song. Hymir, help me bring it up." But Hymir was not sharing Thor's enthusiasm. The giant's ancient face had gone pale as weathered bone, and his deep eyes held terror that spoke of knowledge far older than the current age. "Thor," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "that is no ordinary fish. Cut the line. Cut it now, before it's too late." Thor ignored the giant's warnings, caught up in the thrill of struggle. He planted his feet firmly in the bottom of the boat and pulled with all his divine strength. The boat rocked and swayed, as forces beyond mortal comprehension played out beneath the waves. Whatever had taken his bait was fighting back, and its strength was beginning to match Thor's own. The water around their boat began to change. What had been calm blue-green began to take on a darker hue, as if something massive was rising from the depths below. Small waves appeared from nowhere, rocking their vessel with increasing violence. The temperature of the air itself seemed to drop, carrying with it a scent that spoke of deep ocean trenches and things that had never seen sunlight. "Thor," Hymir pleaded, his ancient voice cracking with fear. "You do not understand what you have awakened. Release the line before you doom us both." But the god of thunder was beyond listening. His divine pride had been fully awakened by the magnificent struggle, and his determination to land this catch had become absolute. He pulled harder, his muscles bulging with effort, thunder rumbling in the distance as his divine nature responded to the intensity of his emotions. The line continued its deadly game of strength against strength. Whatever was below seemed to be testing Thor's power, drawing him into a contest of wills that neither participant was willing to concede. The water around them began to bubble and froth, as if heated from below by some internal fire. Then, without warning, the pulling stopped. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the line hung slack in Thor's hands. The sudden absence of resistance was so unexpected that Thor nearly fell backward into the boat. The water around them had become perfectly still, creating an eerie calm that felt more threatening than the violence that had preceded it. Something was rising from the depths. The water began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing violence. Waves appeared as if from nothing, spreading outward from a point directly beneath their boat. The pressure in the air changed, making both god and giant feel as if their ears might burst. And still, something continued to rise from the crushing darkness of the deep ocean. The first thing to break the surface was the disturbance it created. A hill of water rose from the ocean as if the sea floor itself was pushing upward. The water was no longer clear blue-green, but had taken on murky darkness of the deepest trenches, carrying with it the scent of things that had died in darkness eons ago. Then, rising through this hill of displaced water, came Thor's star-metal fishing hook, still embedded in its catch, emerging from the ocean like a small silver star. But stretching away into the dark water below, Thor could see that his hook had caught something vast and serpentine, covered in scales the size of shields that gleamed with their own internal light. As more of the creature broke the surface, Thor began to understand the true magnitude of what he had caught. This was no ordinary sea beast. What emerged from the depths was a serpent of such enormous proportions that its body seemed to stretch beyond the horizon in both directions. Its scales were dark as midnight, but shot through with veins of sickly green light that pulsed with their own rhythm. The serpent's head, when it finally broke the surface, was larger than Hymir's great hall. Its eyes were pools of venomous green fire that seemed to look directly into the souls of all who met their gaze. When it opened its mouth, revealing fangs like ivory towers and a forked tongue that could have wrapped around their boat, the stench that emerged spoke of poison potent enough to kill gods. Jormungandr, Hymir whispered, and the name carried with it the weight of destiny and prophecy. The World Serpent, the Midgard Serpent. Thor, you have hooked the beast that will be your death at Ragnarök. But Thor heard none of this. His divine nature had fully awakened in response to the threat before him, and Mjolnir was already in his hand. crackling with lightning that reflected the terrible beauty of the serpent's scales. Thunder rolled across the clear sky as the god of thunder faced his destined enemy for the first time. Jormungandr's massive head swayed above them like a mountain given motion, its venomous eyes fixed on Thor with recognition that seemed to span past, present, and future. The serpent's intelligence was ancient and alien, but there was no doubt that it knew exactly who had disturbed its rest in the depths. The creature's voice, when it spoke, was not the hiss one might expect from even a giant serpent. Instead, it was the sound of continents shifting, of ocean currents changing course, of tectonic forces that shaped the world itself. "Son of Odin," the World Serpent said, its words causing waves to appear with each syllable. "You have awakened me from dreams of the world's ending. Do you seek to hasten the twilight of the gods?" Thor raised Mjolnir high, lightning dancing between his fingers as divine power coursed through his magnificent frame. "I seek only to test my strength against the greatest challenges the world can offer, Serpent. If you are such a challenge, then face me." The battle that followed would be remembered and retold until the end of days, though few would ever know its true scope or understand its significance as the first meeting between two beings destined to destroy each other at the world's end. Jormungandr struck first, its massive head darting forward with impossible speed. Jaws that could swallow mountains opened wide, releasing a cloud of poison so virulent that it turned the air green and made the ocean bubble and foam. The toxic breath carried the concentrated essence of every poison that had existed since creation, making even Thor's divine eyes water. With a roar that challenged the serpent's voice, Thor leaped into the air, his divine nature allowing him to hover above the boat. Mjolnir began to glow with inner light as lightning danced between his fingers. The hammer sang as it cut through the poisoned air, its star-forged metal drinking in the primal lightning that Thor called from the sky. The blow struck Jormungandr's head with the force of a falling mountain, creating thunder that rolled across the ocean and would be heard on distant shores. Lightning erupted from the impact, illuminating the serpent's impossible enormity. In that brilliant flash, Thor saw the true scope of what he faced, a creature whose body stretched beyond the horizon in both directions, its scales each the size of a warrior's shield. But the blow that would have shattered continents merely caused the World Serpent to recoil slightly, sending displacement waves across the ocean. Where Mjolnir had struck, a few scales cracked, weeping luminous fluid that steamed when it touched the water. "You are strong, Thunder God," Jormungandr acknowledged, its voice causing whirlpools to form around them. "Stronger than I expected from one so young. But strength alone will not save you from the fate woven into existence since before the first light dawned. You and I are bound by threads stronger than the chains that hold Fenrir." The serpent's massive tail erupted from the water with such force. It created a water spout reaching toward the clouds. Thick as Yggdrasil's trunk and moving with liquid grace, it swept toward Thor with tidal wave force, seeking to crush god and boat in one blow. Thor met the attack with Mjolnir raised high, divine strength against primordial force. The collision sent shock waves through the water that disturbed sediments on the ocean floor and awakened creatures in the deepest trenches. Lightning erupted in brilliant webs that painted the sky in nameless colors, and the energy was so intense it turned water to steam. For a moment that might have been seconds or eternity, Thor and Jormungandr were locked in perfect equilibrium. The ocean boiled from unleashed forces, and storm clouds darkened the sky. The very fabric of reality strained under pressure of their conflict, as if the universe struggled to contain such concentrated power. Thunder rolled continuously across the sky, not discrete crashes, but a constant rumble that spoke of geological forces in motion. The air became thick and hard to breathe from the simple pressure of so much power concentrated in one place. But the battle could not last forever. As magnificent as it was to witness the first clash between these destined enemies, both combatants seemed to understand that this was not their time. This was a prelude, a testing of strength before the final confrontation that would come at the world's end. It was Hymir who broke the deadlock. The ancient giant, terrified beyond measure by what he was witnessing, took his oar and struck at the fishing line that still connected Thor to the World Serpent. The line, strained beyond its limits by the forces it had endured, snapped with a sound like breaking mountains. Freed from its connection to the surface world, Jormungandr began to sink back into the depths. But its great eyes never left Thor's face, and its final words carried across the water with the weight of prophecy. "We will meet again, son of Odin, when the wolf runs free and the world tree shakes. On that day, one of us will die, but neither will survive our meeting." As the massive form of the World Serpent disappeared beneath the waves, the ocean began to calm. The boiling water cooled, the waves subsided, and the storm clouds dissipated as if they had never been. Within minutes, the sea had returned to its morning tranquility, showing no sign of the epic battle that had just taken place. Thor stood in the boat, Mjolnir still crackling with residual lightning, his eyes fixed on the spot where Jormungandr had vanished. For the first time in his divine existence, he had faced an opponent that was truly his equal. The knowledge was both thrilling and sobering. "Why did you cut the line?" Thor demanded, turning to Hymir with divine fury blazing in his eyes. "I could have won. I could have proven my strength beyond all doubt." Hymir, his ancient face still pale with terror, shook his massive head. "You understand nothing, young god. That was not a battle to be won or lost. That was a meeting of destiny, a glimpse of what must come to pass. Jormungandr is not just any sea beast. It is the serpent that encircles the world, holding its own tail in its mouth. When it releases that tail, the world will end." As they rowed back to shore in contemplative silence, Thor found himself deep in thought for perhaps the first time in his divine existence. The thrill of battle still sang in his veins, but beneath it was something new and unsettling, a profound understanding of the weight of destiny surrounding his existence. He had sought a simple test of strength and instead encountered something that challenged not just his power, but his understanding of his place in the cosmic order. For the first time, Thor had looked into the eyes of his prophesied death and found them filled with ancient knowledge that made his own divine wisdom seem childlike. "You begin to understand," Hymir said quietly, breaking their silence. This was not truly a battle, though the forces unleashed could have unmade lesser realms. This was recognition, acknowledgement, the formal introduction between two powers that will define the ending of all things. You have looked into the face of your death and found it patient, intelligent, and utterly certain of its victory. Thor's grip tightened on Mjolnir, finding comfort in the hammer's familiar weight. "Death comes for all beings eventually, even gods. But I am not dead yet, and neither is the World Serpent. Much may change between now and that prophesied day. Hymir's laugh held the bitter wisdom of extreme age. Both of you will grow in power. You will become the greatest warrior among the Aesir. Your strength the stuff of legend. But Jormungandr will also grow, fed by the world's essence, until its very presence becomes a fundamental force of nature. As their boat reached the familiar shores, the morning that had begun with such promise seemed to belong to a different age. The fishing trip Thor had envisioned as adventure had become something far more significant, a pivotal moment in the cosmic drama that would play out until the end of days. "Will you speak of this to others?" Hymir asked as they landed. Thor considered carefully. Who would believe such a tale? A fishing trip that awakened the World Serpent? They would think it boastful exaggeration from a god who caught nothing but disappointment. Better that this encounter remains between us, a secret shared by the only witnesses to destiny taking its first steps. Both god and giant understood the profound truth of what they had witnessed. They had been present at the first act of a drama that would play across the remaining ages of existence, culminating when their mutual destruction would shake reality's foundations and usher in whatever came after the ending. As Thor made his way back toward Asgard, his mind turned toward other adventures that would help him grow in power and wisdom. Each battle won would prepare him for the ultimate confrontation awaiting at the world's end. In the ocean depths, coiled around existence's very foundations, Jormungandr settled back into ancient patience. The serpent's massive form shifted slightly, causing earthquakes on distant shores and tidal waves that would puzzle scholars for generations. These movements were nothing compared to what would happen when the creature finally stirred to full wakefulness. The serpent's dreams filled with visions of the future. Thor grown to legendary power, the gradual approach of Ragnarök, and most clearly, their final meeting when God and serpent would face each other across a battlefield littered with fallen heroes and monsters. In these visions, Jormungandr saw Thor's hammer crushing its skull even as its poison filled the thunder god's lungs, both falling in mutual annihilation that would herald one world's end and another's beginning. But these were dreams of distant futures. For now, the World Serpent was content to rest, growing ever larger and more powerful, patient as only immortal creatures could be. The meeting between Thor and Jormungandr had been the first note in a symphony that would play across the ages, culminating when their destruction would herald the ending of one world and the beginning of the next. Join us in our next tale as we explore how Odin Allfather sacrificed his eye for wisdom at the well of Mimir, and discover the price the gods must pay for the knowledge that guides their steps toward an uncertain future. Until then, rest well and let your dreams be filled with the epic grandeur of Norse mythology.